Ellie cringed at the thought of another blind date. The mere idea of sitting across from a stranger, trying to make small talk, filled her with dread.
Please, Ellie, just this once. We promise it will be different this time.
Her friends pleaded, their pleas echoing in her ears for weeks. They were convinced that this time it would be different, that this time she might actually meet someone worthwhile. She had sworn off blind dates after a series of disastrous encounters. Each one had been worse than the last, leaving her feeling more and more disillusioned. Yet here she was, giving in to their relentless pressure. She couldn't say no to her friends forever, and maybe, just maybe, they were right.
Fine, Ellie sighed. But if he ends up being another dud, I'm blaming you guys. You owe me big time if this goes south.
Little did she know this blind date wouldn't end in a dud. It would end in terror, the kind of terror that would haunt her for a long time. The week crawled by, each day feeling longer than the last as the dreaded Friday approached. She could feel the anxiety building up inside her with each passing hour. Ellie tried to keep her mind occupied, but the thought of the impending date loomed over her like a dark cloud. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to go horribly wrong. She had extracted a promise from her friends that they would call with an emergency if she texted within the first hour. It was her safety net, her escape plan. Her finger hovered over the send button, a lifeline to sanity if needed. She hoped she wouldn't have to use it, but knowing it was there gave her a small sense of comfort. The restaurant was nestled on a secluded street, tucked away from the bustling city. Its dim lighting and antiquated sign gave it an eerie charm, sending a shiver down Ellie's spine as she approached. She took a deep breath, trying to ignore the knot of apprehension twisting in her stomach. This was a mistake, she thought, already regretting her decision to come.
As she stepped inside, the musty smell of old wood and damp carpets filled her nostrils. The restaurant was nearly deserted, save for a lone waiter who led her to a table tucked away in a shadowy corner. The dim lighting made it difficult to see, but she could feel her pulse quicken with each step.
"You must be Ellie," a voice said, snapping her out of her thoughts. She blinked, momentarily disoriented, before focusing on the source of the voice. Ellie looked up to see a man already seated at the table, a smile playing on his lips. His demeanor seemed friendly, yet there was something about his smile that made her uneasy. "I'm Tom," he continued, extending his hand. His grip was firm, almost too firm, as if he was trying to assert some unspoken dominance.
His eyes, a piercing blue, held her gaze a moment too long, as if he was trying to read her soul, sending an unsettling chill down her spine. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. Ellie tried to smile back, but it felt forced and unnatural. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Tom launched into a series of anecdotes, his voice smooth and practiced. He spoke with such confidence, as if he had rehearsed every word. Ellie tried to focus on his words, but something about his manner felt off, too rehearsed, too calculated. It was as if he was performing for an audience. His eyes never left her face, their intensity making her skin crawl. She felt like a specimen under a microscope. She took a sip of her water, hoping to mask her growing unease. The cool liquid did little to calm her nerves, and she wondered what she had gotten herself into.
"Let's move somewhere more private, shall we?" Tom suggested, his voice barely above a whisper.
Before Ellie could protest, he had signaled the waiter, who led them through a labyrinth of empty tables and down a narrow hallway. The air grew colder as they descended, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the silence.
The hallway opened into a small private room, dimly lit by a single flickering candle. The walls were adorned with dozens of framed photographs, their subjects staring out with haunting eyes.
Ellie felt a shiver run down her spine, the room exuding an oppressive, almost sinister aura. This place has secrets, she thought, her hand instinctively reaching for her phone in her purse. As they settled into the plush velvet chairs, Ellie couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The eyes in the photographs seemed to follow her every move, their painted smiles failing to mask the unsettling energy that permeated the room.
This place is interesting, Ellie offered, her voice barely a whisper. She desperately wanted to leave, to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the room and the unnerving intensity of Tom's gaze. But something held her back. A morbid curiosity mixed with a growing sense of dread.
"It has character," Tom replied, his eyes scanning the room. His gaze lingered on each photograph, a strange smile playing on his lips.
"Don't you think so?" he asked, his eyes locking onto hers once more.
Ellie shifted uncomfortably in her seat, the weight of his stare feeling heavier with each passing moment.
"There, something else?" Ellie managed, trying to keep her voice steady. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, a feeling amplified by the eerie silence that had settled over the room. The only sound was the flickering of the candle, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the walls.
Tom began asking Ellie a series of increasingly personal questions, his voice taking on an almost hypnotic cadence. He seemed particularly interested in her life, her dreams, her fears. Ellie, however, found herself struggling to answer, her mind clouded with a growing sense of unease. Tom's questions felt less like polite conversation and more like an interrogation.
"Don't you want to know more about me?" Tom asked, his voice taking on a sharp edge.
Ellie hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to run. But she found herself frozen in place, trapped by the intensity of his gaze and the suffocating atmosphere of the room. As Tom continued to press her for information, Ellie noticed something glinting in his hand. It was a small, silver object, reflecting the candlelight with a sinister gleam. As he shifted in his seat, the object caught the light, revealing itself to be a knife, its blade honed to a razor-sharp edge.
Section 8, a glimmer of steel.
Ellie's blood ran cold. Her heart pounded in her chest, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She tried to speak, but no sound escaped her lips. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. But the only way out was blocked by Tom and the chilling glint of the knife in his hand. A horrifying realization dawned on Ellie. The faces in the photographs lining the walls weren't just random strangers. Their eyes, wide with terror, their expressions frozen in a silent scream, spoke of a fear she now shared. These were not patrons, but victims. This room, a macabre gallery of Tom's past conquests.
Section 9, a faces of fear.
Panic surged through her, threatening to overwhelm her. She had to get out, had to escape the clutches of the man sitting across from her, his eyes gleaming with a terrifying mix of madness and anticipation. But how? As if sensing her intentions, Tom stood up, the knife glinting ominously in his hand.
"Where do you think you're going?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm.
Ellie, fueled by adrenaline and fear, seized her opportunity. She grabbed a heavy silver candlestick from the table and hurled it at Tom, the impact sending him staggering backward. Ellie didn't hesitate. She scrambled out of her chair and sprinted towards the door, her lungs burning with exertion. She could hear Tom's enraged shouts behind her, his footsteps pounding on the wooden floor as he gave chase. But she didn't dare look back. Ellie burst out of the restaurant and into the night, her heart still racing. The darkness seemed to close in around her, but she pushed forward, driven by an overwhelming sense of dread. She didn't stop running until she reached the safety of a crowded street, the familiar sounds of traffic and chatter providing a much-needed sense of normalcy. The lights of the city were a welcome contrast to the eerie silence of the restaurant. She never looked back, her mind replaying the events of the night over and over. The memory of that night was forever seared into her mind, a haunting reminder of the unknown dangers that lurk in the shadows.
The next day, Ellie told her friends everything. She described the strange occurrences, the unsettling atmosphere, and the inexplicable fear that had gripped her. To their horror, they rushed to the restaurant, only to find it closed, the windows boarded up, as if it had been abandoned overnight. A sign on the door read, "Closed until further notice," offering no clues or explanations.
No explanation was ever given, and the restaurant never reopened. It became a ghostly presence in the neighborhood, a place of whispered rumors and unanswered questions. The empty, silent interior left behind an unsettling silence and a chilling mystery that would forever haunt Ellie's dreams. The once lively place was now a shell of its former self.
From that day forward, Ellie swore off blind dates, the fear of the unknown too great to ignore. She vowed to trust her instincts, to listen to the inner voice that had warned her that night. No matter how much her friends pleaded, she remained resolute. They couldn't understand the depth of her fear, the terror that had taken root in her heart. Some things, she realized, were best left to fate, or in this case, avoided entirely. The experience had changed her, leaving her more cautious and wary of the unknown.